Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I have two great guests today, the Sadler brothers, Andy and Gerry. And Andy and I go back, probably 40 years now, working at Chemical Bank in New York City. And Gerry is a dual citizen, and he has his Italian passport and has been living there for years. So welcome, guys. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Bob. Hi.
Hi there. I'm a dual citizen because of Brexit.
Okay.
I never took up the possibility, the opportunity, because a UK passport was okay for me. But following Brexit, which I continue to consider the most stupid thing I've ever heard in my life, I need the Italian one to be safe. And incidentally, there's a world classifica, how would you call it in English? A league table of passports, and Italy is one of the top passports in the world, certainly higher up than the UK. It's based mostly on the number of countries that you can go to without.
Right, yeah. So, well, I started the process to get my Italian citizenship way too late. I have somebody working on it, but I found out that you could get around the long waits at the consulate if you go live in Italy for 45 days. So I may move in with you for 45 days, Gerry. We'll have to see.
There's an interesting point. Maybe a lot of people don't know it. There are ways you can get in there through marriage. You can get in there through residence. Right. I qualified for both. I didn't qualify for hereditary reasons. It's a catch-22 situation. In 1947, they changed the law so that anybody born of an Italian mother could become Italian, because before it was only, you remember the Sabine law in Henry V. The problem was I was born in 1949 and my mother got married in 1946, i.e. before 1947, and she automatically became British. So no, I couldn't become Italian via the hereditary line. They back in, I think in 1957, they could re-ask to obtain the Italian citizenship, and dual citizenship was then allowed. Also, the fact that she got this Cavaliere business, I have a feeling, I've been sounding it out, but I'm not sure. They could have made her Italian again. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I've since found out that this has been contested in the law courts. That you can't take somebody's citizenship away just because she got married to somebody else and she was obliged to become, in this case, British. So if you go to a lawyer, they're called the 1948 lawyers. There are a few around Italy, and go via them. This might be of interest to people over there in the States. You can ask to become Italian because the fact that they lost their citizenship was anti-constitutional.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people are finding that out. So let's go back to your mom. She was born in Italy, and I know there's a few interesting stories about her and growing up in World War II and everything like that.
I've often wondered. I've never quite understood why she ran away from Italy. I certainly wouldn't do it. I wouldn't go to the UK. I can appreciate that after the war, there was a tendency to go for the safe haven, but she met my father. She couldn't have met him before the 23rd of April 1945, which is when the Allies reached Verona, and she was in Lecco, which is on Lake Como, which is where I live now. And I always remember him telling me that he was in the signals, so he had access to a motorbike, to a lorry, to a jeep. He even flew a plane once. He didn't actually pilot it, but he took over the controls. Apparently, this is what he told me. And he was always behind the lines, being in the signals. He was never a frontline soldier, which was lucky for him. And he managed to go around South Africa and up into Egypt and follow the war behind the lines.
North Africa, Gerry.
North Africa. He said that the closest he ever got to the front line was El Alamein, because it's the front line that moved backwards.
No, you said South Africa. It's North Africa he was in.
He was in Verona, and he and friends would go out in the evening and visit bars and this, that, and the other. And Verona to Lecco is a fair little bit of road, especially when you didn't have a lot of motorways around. Italy had motorways, but I don't think there was any motorway going anywhere between Verona and Lecco. And that's where he met Mum on one of his evening trips. And then they got married at the end of 1946. Now, I don't know when he was demobbed, but the war ended in 45, so he certainly went back to it. I would imagine he went back to England before 1946, and by the end of 1946 they got married. So it was a pretty hasty decision on her part.
If we just for clarity, just go to the beginning and we'll come back to 46. I mean, Mum was born in 1917.
17.
Right at the end of the First World War, and I don't know a great deal. Gerry may know more, but just for continuity, to go right to the beginning of her life, she didn't have a particularly great start, I don't think, because she was orphaned at the age of 12, I believe, and she was making mosaics, making the trinkets.
Other things, yeah. She her father was a carpenter, but not a interestingly, both my grandparents were carpenters. My English grandfather was a rustic carpenter, and he made garden furniture mostly. The Italian carpenter, he had his own company, let's say. I don't know how many workers he had working for him, but he did have workers working for him. And he made antique furniture in Florence to sell to the tourists. So it was somewhat more
reproduction furniture.
That's cool.
Antique furniture.
And so people know, this is in Florence, in a little place just outside of Florence called Galuzzo.
Yeah. We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co.
Where the Certosa is in Florence, it's 10-minute drive out of.
I don't know if anybody knows the Certosa. It's a monastery.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
If anybody's in Italy and they drive down the motorway, Florence has got 4 exits. As you come from the north, and you go down, you go round the west side, and you come back under Florence, so to speak, and you can see the Certosa on the hill. That's one of the exits for Florence on the motorway.
So Andy, you said she was orphaned at like around 12 or something like that. So who raised her? Do you know? Was she in an orphanage?
She had an older brother and an older sister. They looked after her. She was her father died, and a couple of years later, her mother died. She always said that her mother died of a broken heart. I don't know quite if that sounds very dramatic, but and yes, there were the 3 of them. The brother was, I think she was about 12, so the brother must have been, at least 17, I think, when he died. He was already working in the carpentry shop.
They argued a lot, didn't they? The father and
well,
Gaston.
I heard stories that he was rather bringing because he spent more time playing cards with the other employees than actually doing much work. He was the most simpatico person I ever knew. When I was a kid, he used to send me comics, Topolino, the Italian Mickey Mouse. He used to send them to me in England. I always liked him. When you get older, you find out a bit more. Then yes, he was a bit of a lacy bugger. He was a communist. I remember going to their place one time. They were pretty poor.
Do you remember the toilet? Do you remember the toilet in their little place? My God.
That was... They weren't the only people who have a toilet like that. It's what they call a chest sort, yeah. He had red towels hanging outside the window. Mum said, "Oh, look, the communist flag." But he was on a pension from the early 50s because he was invalido. He was an invalid. I don't quite know what he was an invalid of. Oh, heart attack or something like that. Yeah, heart attack. He had a bad heart, but he spent his time hunting and fishing.
Hunting and fishing.
Well, that's not a bad life.
He was a bit of a scoundrel, to be honest. Bit of a scoundrel.
Now, do you know, did he have to serve in the Italian army during the war, or was he able to get out of it because he was so conniving?
To be honest, I've no idea. As I say...
he probably would have got out of it.
That's what I'm thinking.
He would have been in the local bar in Caluzzo, holding court.
Come to think of it, if he was a communist, he might well have been a partisan.
Yeah.
They were.
But he was a character. He was a character. And Jenny was Mum's elder sister. And they, the two of them brought Mum up, really, or provided, a home life until she could leave home. And she went, as I understand it, Gerry, correct me, I'm sure you will, when she was 17 or something like that, and she went to work in the centre of Florence and rented a flat in Piazza della Signoria, which is, the most prestigious place you could possibly be in Florence. It would be like being in a flat overlooking St. Paul's in London. And she worked there as a...
central than St. Paul's. A bit more like... I said a bit more central than St. Paul's, a bit more like Leicester Square.
Well, anyway, a very nice little place to be at 17 years old in 1937 or so. 35.
Your maths isn't quite right.
About 35. And she worked as a secretary, I believe, Gerry, for the Mussolini's party. Is that right?
I don't know what she did. I know that she worked in the Ufficio di Collocamento, which is the labour exchange. I know she was in San Candido during the war, which is on the Italian-Austrian border. She said it was a horrible place because it was so cold. But up in the Alps, it's quite nice actually. But possibly during the war, it was a bit too cold. And there she was teaching, I think. I don't know what else. I don't know what she was doing in Lecco, for example. Yes, you mentioned the mosaics. I remember her.
That's how she damaged her finger, wasn't it?
No. The finger happened in England, but it might have been the start of it. The finger happened in England. I've got the same finger.
Mum was working in Piazza della Signoria, as I recall, in her late teens, and then the war started, and a lot is lost. We have stories that she was helping the partisans. Gerry, I mean, you know a bit more about this than me.
Well, no, I don't know a lot. I only know that she told me that she had helped a lot of people to escape because being in the labour exchange, she was party to information, and she would let people know. The cyclist I mentioned in that email I sent you, she did know him. She was a friend of his, and I can believe that because when we were kids, she got him to send us to signed photographs.
Yeah, I remember those coming. I remember those.
Yeah. Bartoli. And he is well known for having helped. He used to cycle every day all around, telling people get out and this, that, and the other, and warning them, because there was a roundup of the Jews all the time. And this was Mum said as well. She told many Jews, so that could well be true.
Yeah,
whether there was a lot or just a few, I don't know. But,
and this may be why she escaped Florence, or she escaped Milan.
Well, this is one
Mussolini
thing I've always
was
pondered.
hanging upside down with piano wire, because she was in the square when Mussolini was hung upside down.
She was in Milan?
Yeah, she was in the square. She told me that many times.
Yeah?
She was there. And I, putting two and two together, she must have, because didn't the remaining Italians that were the Mussolini supporters that were still around, didn't they try to go to the north to create a Lombardy sort of breakaway state? Wasn't that the plan at the end of the war?
That was before.
Okay.
When he was hung up was a lot later. He was trying to go to Switzerland. Why he took the route up the lake, I don't know. I thought it would have been easier to cross over in Como to Chiasso.
But he was caught, wasn't he? He was caught by the partisans.
Yeah. He was stopping in. He stopped in a villa up in Dongo, which is almost at the top of the lake, more or less where we had our caravan when the kids were very small. Now it's
took him down to Milan to execute him.
And they dragged him down to Milan, yeah, and hung him up.
Well, Mum said she was in the square and saw it.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Why she escaped why she then went up to Lecco and ended up meeting Dad.
No, I think
is Chemical Bank's game.
I'm not sure of the dates there. I can look that up. It'll be, I'm not sure the date when he was actually strung up.
I think it was 45.
Well, yeah, it was. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember if it was before or after. I think it was actually after the war in Germany ended, but I'm not positive. I don't remember exactly when they caught him. But he was an interesting character because, before he became this fascist kind of, wanting to attack, Ethiopia and all of this nonsense, he actually did some pretty good things in Italy.
Well, the trains ran on time, right?
Exactly. We need them here in New Jersey because they don't run on time here.
That's the old joke. So one thing he did, the trains ran on time.
No, it's not the one thing he did. There's also the area in South Tuscany, which was a bog, and that he made that habitable. It's the age-old thing with a dictator. You need to get something done, you get it done. You don't have to go through all the hassle of going through the lower house, the upper house, and back down to the lower house. Interesting, the death of Mussolini was on the 28th of April, 1945. Now, as I've just said, the Allies reached Verona on the 23rd of April, 1945. So she must have been in Lecco, and she must have gone down to Milan to see him strung up. I don't know.
Yeah, well, a lot of people went there. So now she didn't speak any or much English, right? And I'm assuming Dad didn't speak a whole lot of Italian. So, do you know how he got her to England and what happened when she got there?
He carried on not speaking a lot of Italian, to be honest. She had to learn
How my
English.
dad wooed my mother is the holy grail of information. I tell you, he was not the most romantic man. So I think the escape route must have been 9/10 of the law.
Well, they wrote to each other. When was it when Dad died or when we found their letters. Now I know Dad Mum wrote to him in Italian, and Dad went to Mrs. Elcombe in Horsell to get them translated.
Yeah.
And Mum would have received letters in English, and I don't know where she went to get them. Somewhere
one of the ones that really made me laugh, and to this day, I'll go to my grave laughing about it. When Mum made her way over to England, and it took 3 days, she was in receipt of a letter from Dad telling her that when she got to Woking to pick up a hansom that would and direct them to Horsell. Well, Horsell is about a mile away from Woking. You would have thought that after 3 days of travel, he might have met her at the station rather than getting a hansom.
Yeah, the thing is, she didn't have a cell phone to call him. Otherwise, he would have to stand there for days.
I know. I realise that. It just made me tickle, because we wouldn't even say a hansom these days, would you? You'd say, in fact, you'd say an Uber.
Yeah, right. That's right. You won't even say a cab anymore. That's right. Americans don't know the difference between woking and dorking anyway. So I fully understand that.
Yes, that would have been if she had ended up in Dorking. I don't know what she'd have done.
Yeah. No, she would have managed, but they ended up living with my grandparents, and they, as many families did at that time, they lodged in the front room. They converted a lounge into a bedroom, and they lived there for about 4 years. And Gerry was...
I would say even more, because she turned up in 46, and until she was married, they surely had to be separated.
Yeah.
So in the house, there were 2 bedrooms upstairs, and they had 2 sons. And as I remember the place, and I don't expect it was different beforehand, there were 2 double beds, 1 double bed in each room.
Yeah, yeah.
So they would have put her up downstairs, and Dad and Uncle Eric would have, I presume, been sleeping in the same bed.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, after
as we used to, but we were much smaller.
I know, but he was living on a promise that in a short time he would be.
And Eric would have to go downstairs.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah.
But then they were there.
Of course, you were brought up a heathen as a consequence.
No, I wasn't brought up a heathen.
You were a C of E. You were C of E. At least I was always a Roman Catholic. You were a C of E.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they.
Now,
I'll let Gerry tell the story.
So they got married at the end of 1946. I was born in 1949 because they were living with my grandparents, so they couldn't really have a kid. Although I presume I came along a bit too early, because they started building a house in 1949, which wasn't ready till about 1951 or something like that. But yes, I was born, and I think after about 6 months, I was christened. And later, when they wanted to, later 2 things happened. First, my mother realised that the marriage in the registry office wasn't Catholic, so she had to get married again in a Catholic church.
Do you know how she realised?
No, go on.
Yeah. Father O'Connor, do you remember Father O'Connor?
Yeah.
She went to confession.
Yeah.
And during the interrogation, he asked her where and when she had been married. And she said, Woking Registry Office, or words to that effect, to which he told her, you're not married. To which she almost collapsed, and was going to be in hell for the rest of her life. And she realised she was married, she had a baby, and she was not married.
And And so from that onwards, they wanted to send me to a Catholic school. So before I could go to the Catholic school at the age of nearly 5, I was baptized. So christened first, and then I was converted without really knowing much about it.
That really is
the same as anybody that's baptized. They don't know anything about it.
Right.
They are by default Christians or Catholics, and I was by default first a Christian and then a Catholic.
But in those days, it mattered. It was
yes,
huge.
Yeah.
It was huge, and you were C of E. And I still, knowing how devout Mum was, and her 100% belief, it must have been one hell of a shock to be told. She was going to Catholic, a bit naive in a way, I imagine, to go to a registry office and get married. And then not realizing you're not married. I mean, that's a bit naive. But that's how she told me the story, that over confession, she discovered that she was not married in the eyes of the church. And they quickly had to, but obviously our grandparents were dyed-in-the-wool British Protestant. And Mum was not really accepted. When she came over and they went to live, as I understand it, and Gerry, you'll know better than me, our grandparents on Dad's side, Mum never got on with Grandmum, but grandfather she did get on with. But they were both Protestant, and they were not going to have. A, Mum had been on the losing side, and B, she was Catholic. I mean, we kicked the Catholics out 500 years ago, so she was not really accepted.
You say you kicked the Catholics out 500 years ago, but actually Queen Elizabeth was tolerant. The one that wasn't tolerant was Mary, Queen of Scots.
Yeah, well, that's irrelevant. That's irrelevant to this discussion. But
as far as Catholicism goes, they were accepted under Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, but not by our grandmother.
And I'll tell you an interesting story. Here. I guess it must have been around 1964, 65 or something like that. My cousin was marrying a Protestant in New York, and they allowed them to get married at the Catholic. Now listen to how strange this stuff. This is really crazy stuff. They were allowed to get married in the Catholic Church under 2 conditions. The first one was they could not be. Well, the first one was they couldn't be married at the altar. They had to be married behind the altar rail. So back then they had the rail in front of the altar normally you would walk up to the altar and get married. They had to get married there. Who knows why? And the second thing was they had to promise that they would raise the children and baptize the children Catholic. Right.
Yeah, I know that rule. Yeah.
But the whole altar rail, I mean, does it really matter where you are?
It doesn't matter.
Crazy.
My friends Bruno and Adriele.
Yeah.
Anyway, when we've been to England with them, she goes to mass every day if she can, and sometimes she manages to drag him along. He's not really interested. Anyway, I took them to a Church of England service, and she was quite impressed. She said, "But it's the same. It's the same as going to mass." Yes, it is.
Well, we let's not get into theology, but
it's all a bit. We're talking about Italians and
no, but if you want to get into theology, there is a huge difference. Not that I necessarily agree or not agree, but it's the transubstantiation that makes the difference.
Yes, I know. I always say to her, the difference is it doesn't become, it represents.
But anyway,
which is the big difference.
That Mum was devout Catholic, and you were brought up as a heathen for 5 years, and it does always tick.
No, it's not a heathen. It's a Christian.
But I do want to ask you, I mean, there were not a lot, but I know in previous years, and from what I read, there was Italians that migrated to England before. And I'll tell you one thing that I found when I was researching Nicole. Gerry, Andy knows, but my children are adopted, and Nicole goes back. I've traced her back to the Bassano brothers, who were court musicians for Henry VIII, who stayed there, married English women. And, I was able to trace Nicole back to her birth father's family was here 1640 or something like that. And I was able to trace them back. But what I wanted to ask you was, one of the things I read, which I found very interesting, that a lot of Italians, for some strange reason, were ice cream makers in the UK.
Yes, the Americans didn't invent ice cream.
Have you tasted Italian ice cream, Bob?
Yes, oh yes, I know.
Have you tasted Italian pizza?
Yes, I know. You can't compare.
It's different. They know what they're doing out there. Italy is the place to eat. There is nowhere in the world that comes close.
Italy, actually.
Wait, are you trying to say that British food isn't that good?
No, I do tell everybody that there are some pretty good things in English food.
But in England, you'll find good food. But in Italy, if you go to any pizza place,
I know every place is
South
good.
Rome anyway, it'll be perfect.
Have you got a better microphone, Andy?
What? Why is that?
Have you got a better voice? You're not coming over too loud.
I hear him okay. Maybe
Yeah.
I hear him pretty good.
I just have to keep very quiet when he's talking.
Do you want to move on to as we grew up?
Yes, I wanted to ask you about that. What it was like being Italian descent in the UK.
Yeah, it was fun.
We lost the war.
Yeah, Jerry's basically right. We lost.
Really?
We got. I was saying to Jerry.
We didn't have Italian names, but we were known to be Italians. So we didn't get the total brunt of it, but we were like the losers.
We were singled out. I mean, there were jokes, for example, the one that always sticks in my mind from the playground when I was about 7 or 8 was, how many gears does an Italian tank have? It has 5, 1 forward, 4 reverse. We were called eye-ties all the time, eye-ties. But it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad.
No, it wasn't
overpowering.
Bad, but we were sort of labelled.
Yeah, labelled.
And Italians were also stereotyped at the time.
Yeah.
They were all short. They were all short, dark. I guess it's because most of the Italians they'd seen.
I think it's because we were better looking. I think that's probably what it is.
But Bob, how did you know that I had the Italian heritage? You wouldn't have known.
No, I knew. No, I'll tell you. You probably forgot. You know how I found out? I was going to mention this. I said something to you about being Italian, about my grandparents or something like that, and you did a whole string of Italian to me, and I went, "Where'd that come from?"
that was back in FPD.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And that's when you told me that your mom was Italian.
Right. Yeah, because it would be not obvious in any other way.
Obviously. No. I had no idea.
If you were female, you would have known, obviously, but you're not.
Now that's the old joke about being half English and half Italian.
Yeah, I always tell people I'm half Italian from the waist down. Normally gets a crack.
I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. But it's true. It is true. So you could just about. I mean, I'm 100% Italian, so you could just use your imagination.
Are you first generation then?
I'm second. My father, he and his oldest sister were born in America. His 3 other siblings were all born in Naples or Circolo. And both my families came in 1915. I still can't gather why my father's family came, only because my grandmother had these noble roots and nobody else came except for our aunt. The only thing I could think of is that her uncle was supposedly an entrepreneur, and they came in 1905. So I think they must have said, come to America, we'll start you up in a business and all of that. My mother's family, my grandmother, they came to America same time. World War I had just broken out. My grandfather had fought in Libya in 1911, and my grandmother said, "You're not fighting in another war. We're going to America." I think her brother was here. I think they were going to go back. They left my uncle with his grandparents. He didn't come to America until 1955. Hadn't seen his parents in 35 years, and never met his brothers and sisters.
Wow!
But he didn't have to fight in the war because by that time he had, I think, 3 or 4 children, so he was exempt from going into the war. It's interesting because, like I said, people don't realize that, and Americans, there were a lot of Italian war brides in America also, but we were stigmatized in other ways, some of the ones that you mentioned, but never about the losing of the war, because like I said, my grandparents were made illegal aliens or enemy aliens, actually, not even illegal, enemy aliens. And after about 6 or 8 months, Roosevelt realized, or somebody told him to realize, he needed these Italians to fight.
Yeah. So
they had to take that, they had to do away with it because, I mean, even when they did it, by the end of the war, my grandparents had 4 children in the Army and Navy. And they had to do it with the Germans, they had to do it with the Italians, and they even did it with the Japanese. And the difference was the Japanese, they didn't send to the Orient, they sent the Japanese to Europe to fight, where the Italians,
understandably,
it didn't matter. There were so many of them.
The Italians, a hell of a lot of the Italians were against fascism. And that's where all the partisans came from. So, if you enrolled Italians into the army, they would be coming to help liberate Italy.
And, the interesting thing about it is they did put Italians in some of the camps in America, but mostly on the West Coast, around San Francisco and everything, not so much on the East Coast. And in fact, I think it's probably half true, but there are stories to say that at one point, they hired the government hired the mafia to patrol the docks in New York City because there weren't enough people. There weren't enough people.
I just wanted to mention before I forget what I sent you yesterday, because I'm very proud.
Oh yes, please, yes, that is amazing.
And why she was honoured in such a way, and. That's equivalent probably to, I don't know if you're familiar with the MBE, OBE, but it's probably, the MBE I think is more prestigious. No, the OBE would be more prestigious, wouldn't it? The Order of the British Empire. But I think, Gerry, is something equivalent to that. Mum's,
there are various types of cavalleria, but it's a knighthood. Cavaliere is a knight.
Right. And she did all the time we were growing up. I mean, I was aware that she would be often helping because there was a big influx of Italians in this area. There were a few areas, like Bedford was one. Around here, around Woking, was another area.
You know why they came to Woking?
Well, there was the mushroom farm. There was employment. There were factories like the Lion Works.
Further back, during the war at Chobham, there were prisoner of war camps.
Right.
The Italians were put in those prisoner of war camps. After the war, they did a bit like Mum. They ran away from Italy. But down in the south, there wasn't a lot of work. And so they came to England, where they'd been working in the market gardens during the war, because they were in prisoner of war camps, but they were also working in the market gardens. And where you bought your first house used to be a huge market garden.
Oh yeah, I used to play on it before it was a housing estate. I used to play on that place with Mark Williams. So I know.
I never went into there, but it was a pretty big area. Yes.
Oh, it was huge. And the workers used to take a raft, a little hand thing operated with a rope across the canal. We used to pull it the wrong side, and we used to play on that nursery all the time. And yeah, Gerry's right. I bought my first house when they turned that whole massive agricultural land into a housing estate, and then 3 months later, promptly moved to America. But that's another story. But yeah, Mum was rewarded or recognized for the decades of help she gave to those Italians, especially in the 50s and 60s, where maybe they would have a court case for parking fine or whatever it might be, and she would represent voluntarily these people in court.
She was contacted a lot of the time to help with translations when they'd hauled somebody in, maybe at the police, and or if they were, I don't know, missing documents and things like that, etc.
But she found work for people, didn't she? She helped a lot. And she was she wasn't particularly educated, as we said. She was orphaned at 12. She was working. But somehow she educated herself, and she had a 40-year career as a teacher. And there are generations now. If I go around Woking into a coffee shop and I mention my mother in any way, la professoressa, la Fiorentina, these generations all around Woking, and I'm talking of hundreds of people, all knew my mother and remember her with great affection, because all the children of children, at least 3 generations, were all taught Italian, ironically, by my mother, because these children were born of Southern Italian, uneducated, primarily parents who spoke dialect, and they wanted their children to speak proper Italian. So
she managed to teach all of these people Italian, but not her younger son.
Yeah. I knew that was coming. That's an old one. But
well, I haven't been able to teach my grandchildren. My son knows a fair bit of English. Would you believe on St. George's Day he's taking an English exam to see if he can qualify to be an English teacher over here? But he's picked it up. My son, since the age of 17 years and 11 months, has lived in Leeds, in Rotterdam, all over southern Spain, Marrakesh, Mexico, Guatemala, and India.
Wow, that's great.
A couple of years ago, came back here.
Yeah, they didn't teach us either, and somebody mentioned a little while ago, in the States, the Jewish parents would send their kids to Hebrew school on Saturday, and the Polish would send their kids to Polish school. A lot of not that I wanted to go to school on Saturdays to learn Italian, but I wish I did, and I wish they had something like that, because to your point, a lot of it was they wanted to forget about Italy. They wanted to assimilate so badly that they didn't talk about Italy. I mean, maybe if you asked, but I want to ask you one question about the Italian prisoners of war. Were they allowed to stay if they wanted to?
I guess so, because a lot came back. There was a big community in Woking. When I left in 1974, I remember there was about 2,000. The community grew so much that the priests would come down every Sunday to do mass in Italian,
and they still do.
That took off, and it carried on.
Wow!
We organised feste. I remember helping out. I was drawing out tickets, coupons for a drink and a sarnie thing. We had a football team, an Italian football team. I played in as well. So yes, there was quite a community. As I say, they were mostly Southern Italians. I remember one guy who played football. He was tall and blonde, but when I chatted to him about it, he says that I come from almost in Yugoslavia, up at Fiume, that part of the world. So yes, he was Italian, but he wasn't the stereotyped Italian, which people thought of as Italian. You know, I live up in the north. It is different.
I know it's different. Yeah.
Talking about prisoners of war, Bob. Just a very quick story. A lady came over here in 1953, I think it was. Cut a long story short. I love her very much. She's like my mother. Her name is Victoria, and she came over at the age of, I think, 16. And she was recruited as effectively an au pair. She'd grown up on a farm, never been educated, worked on the field since she was 5 years old, and she needed a way of escaping. And she was from Abruzzo, is it, Gerry? Abruzzo, I think. She was from Abruzzo.
Certainly that area.
A very rural, very rural, backward area. I think she was the offspring of the manor of the house man, and
I heard that story too.
Yeah, so she was, she was the product of an illicit liaison, shall we say? Yeah, and she worked night and day hard on in the fields, and at about 15 she was in the little local village town, whatever, and this man was coming through trying to recruit people who wanted to come and work and live in the UK, effectively like an au pair. And she followed it up, and she came to England, and she went to a couple of places, and then
she was a lodger with us.
Sorry?
She was a lodger with us at one point.
No, I'm going to explain very briefly, if I can, what happened. She came over, she worked in a couple of places, then she got, funnily enough, have you heard of the John Lewis Partnership and Waitrose?
No.
Think about it. All the time you were here in England, John Lewis.
I know that I recognize Waitrose, yeah.
Well, Waitrose is part of the John Lewis Partnership. Anyway, it's a huge, it's like Marks and Spencer's. It's very big.
Oh, right, okay.
UK company.
Yeah, I remember Waitrose.
Vicky ended up working as a housekeeper type arrangement. She had to wear the black uniform with a white frilly apron in a big house here in Woking for John Lewis of the John Lewis Partnership.
Ah, okay.
And the person who got her that job was my mother. And ever since then, they became friends. And to this day, she was my godmother. And to this day, I see her regularly. I spoke to her yesterday. I see her every week. She's 92 now. And an example of how my mother helped and how those relationships lasted.
Wow, and that's fabulous.
Point of the story is the prisoner of war camp question. So my parents had a lodger to make ends meet when they managed to build the house that Gerry talked about earlier on. And so to help pay the modest mortgage of £4.06 a month.
I thought it was £2.06.
I used to go and pay it.
So did I.
Yeah. We had to cycle down once a month, and it was
the end of the road.
End of the road. It was £4 and a tanner, £4.06. That's how I remember it anyway. Because I used to get a £1 note change from a £5 note, and so they rented out one of the rooms to a Polish
bedroom
prisoner. Yeah, Gerry's bedroom. They rented that room out to a Polish prisoner of war called Tony Zientek, and Vicky and him married.
Oh wow, that's
and
some
he was
story.
my godfather,
and he was Gerry's godfather, and Vicky is my godmother. And well, just wonderful people, really. And war makes strange bedfellows.
Was he a prisoner of war?
Yes, he was. Yes,
but weren't they on our side?
That's a good point. Yeah. That's a very, very good point. I always understood.
How many Poles died at Monte Cassino fighting for the Allies?
I always understood he was a POW, but I can't argue that one. And in fact, talking about going back, as you said, Bob, I mean, Gerry's in Italy because Mum was going to go back to Italy.
Yeah. Well, partly with that.
And she never did.
I worked as a kid. Like Saturday mornings when I was at home, in the kitchen and Mum was cooking and that, and she went on and on and on about Italy and looking out of the window at the grey skies and saying, "Oh,
Cello azzurro, manca la cello azzurro.
I was brainwashed into wanting Italy. I certainly remember my holidays here, and I wanted to come out. I would have done anything to come over, any sort of job. And when I got into the dealing room at Citibank, I thought, well, that's the end of that. I'm not going to go to Italy. And then this offer came up, and I certainly wasn't sure that I was going to take it. And after I took the interview, I went back to the flat there in London where I was sharing with Stuart and the others. And Stuart asked me, "Well, are you going?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "How much are they offering you?" And I told him. He said, "Well, you're a bloody idiot then." Don't know. At the time, my annual salary going from being a teller into the dealing room had gone up from £1,050 a year to £2,250 a year pounds, and I was offered in Italy to go to Italy 12 million, which at an exchange rate of 1,360 lira to the pound was about £9,000. She worked as a secretary at the BBC for Ruggero Orlando. But do you know of Ruggero Orlando? Because he was famous here in Italy as the Italian correspondent at WWII. After London, during the war, he was in London. Then he went to New York.
Does everyone know what WWII is?
Radio Televisione Italiana is Italian state.
The BBC of Italy.
Radio and television.
Right. And we would know it as RAI over here in America, because we're not,
When I came over here in '74, he was still the correspondent in New York for RAI. So I wondered whether he was known to the Italian community or not.
I'm sure he was, or maybe still is, but I had never heard of him. But I wasn't, up until a few years ago, I wasn't paying that much attention. So, well, this has been fantastic, guys. I really, really appreciate you taking the time. Great stories about your mom and getting that knighthood and how she supported people both in Italy and in England.